everyone, to this week's episode. Today we are talking about the book. There have been so many books about brand storytelling. This is one of many, but I think it's worth talking about because it is such a powerful strategy. So I'm Paula Williams.
I'm John Williams.
And we are ABCI, and ABCI's mission is
to help all you folks out there in the aviation world sell more of your products and services.
Absolutely. And the book club is one of the things that we do every month to make sure that we are up to speed on some of the ideas that are going on in marketing and sales and business and aviation and everything else. And so our book of the month is Brand Storytelling by Miri Rodriguez. Put your customers at the heart of your brand story. And this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart, but I don't know that this is my favorite book on this topic that is near and dear to my heart. What did you think, John?
Well, it did say something kind of interesting with respect to vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
And either missed it in all the schools I went to, but anyway, it just was sort of an interesting idea that we've used from time to time without trying to.
Yeah, that sometimes admitting a mistake or admitting an insecurity or something like that is a powerful thing. And I think people of our generation kind of resist that because we were brought up to be invincible, right?
Yeah, well, the one that comes to mind is we had a client that wanted to be number one for a specific keyword.
Mm-hmm.
And you said, of course.
I don't think we said, of course. I think we said, we'll try.
No, you said, of course. You said, but the caveat is, and and we tried for a while, and for some reason it just didn't work. Now, fast forward a bunch of years, and you're in the same boat.
Mm-hmm.
You want to be number one for a specific keyword,
Mm-hmm.
and you have figured out mostly what it takes, and you got to be on top of it all the time.
Right.
Well, back then we didn't know mostly what it took for the person involved, and we could get them close, but not like we are. We bounce around number one, number two, number one, number two. We could never get him to number one because there was some stuff that we didn't know.
Right. And don't get us wrong, he was number one for a bunch of keywords, but this one specific keyword was just driving us crazy. Sorry?
Just like you, we're number one for a bunch of stuff, but you wanted one specific one.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And, so that makes a great brand story for us because, when people ask us for that, we can say, you know what, there are a few things that are out of our control in terms of those Google results. And, what your competitors do matters just as much as what we do.
Then it becomes a matter of what are you willing to do to make that happen?
Exactly. And at some point,
not just in terms of work on your part,
mm-hmm.
but vigilance and money.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And how willing are you to continue to do that, to keep that position? Because, getting there for a day, okay, fine. Then you're playing whack-a-mole for the rest of the year. So, generally speaking, a saner SEO strategy is not quite as satisfying because, you are not winning a specific game with a specific keyword against a specific competitor that is driving you crazy and you really want this keyword. And I totally get that because that's where I am right now. But, I am pretty happy with where we are in general on social media, on SEO, but that doesn't mean that I wouldn't like that number one keyword against this particular competitor.
Anyway, so had to eat some crow way back when. That was what, 15 years ago?
Yeah, exactly.
So, but
and I actually, go ahead.
You actually what?
I actually really like it when I am talking to a salesperson and they tell me a weakness of their product or a weakness of their business model or whatever, even if it's not relevant to what I'm, or especially, I guess, if it's not relevant to what I'm after. Because if they say this is not the fastest way to make money, or this is not the fastest way to solve this problem, but it is the most secure, you start with the downside. And I think that sometimes is very, what is the word, engaging, or very disarming when someone does that, because then you realize, okay, they're not perfect, and they know they're not perfect for every situation, but that makes it great.
Yeah.
Cool. So that's was one of the things that you learned from the book that you didn't. I mean, I kind of like Donald Miller's book better, the StoryBrand, and then also Tyler Lessard's. I think was also really, really good. But
Yeah, I don't think those are exactly. I don't recall them as the technical.
mm-hmm,
So this one goes down to very specifics.
mm-hmm, into the mechanics of how to be vulnerable, or how to demonstrate vulnerability without it being a downside for you, which I think is good. So anyway, just thinking of a couple of story brands, and part of the reason that we keep bringing these books up, and I think we feature one a year for the past few years, is because it's such a powerful thing. I don't know if you remember, there was a Google ad in 1976. Google was called Backrub. It was originally Backrub, Sergey Brin, and the other guys. That was the name for it because it was, kind of emphasizing the whole concept of backlinks. And then I'm not sure why they changed it to Google, but soon after that, they started to tell stories. So the Google commercials are usually a story of some kind that is told through the search engine, right? So you see somebody typing on the screen, and the series of searches tells a story. So, one of the first ones that they did is called Parisian Love. It's a 3-act story using the Google search screen, right? You follow the story of what we presume to be a young man Googling his French adventure of studying abroad, then falling in love and starting a family. You never see the guy, you never see his family, you never even see France or Paris, but you see the things that he is looking for as he's looking for study abroad opportunities, and then specific schools, and then this, and then this, and then this, and then great restaurants for a first date, and then, baby furniture, so on. So it's a great story that is told using only the product, right?
Yep.
And why does that work? It's because it, you start watching this and going, okay, yeah, I do Google searches all the time. And you kind of get lulled into, well, this is going to be boring. But then you start getting involved in this guy's life, without knowing anything about him, just other than the searches that he's making on Google. And this is actually a Super Bowl ad. It was so good that they bought time during the Super Bowl back when it was expensive to run this ad. So it was kind of cool. You had a hero, you had conflict, you have happily ever after. It's got everything that a great story has, and use the product. So I think that one was a good one.
I agree.
I'm glad. So anyway, I think the hardest thing in stories, or the hardest thing for me in stories, especially if I'm representing a brand that is maybe new to this, is introducing conflict in a way that doesn't scare our client or scare us, right? Because if it's all happy stories about our product is this, and it's great, and it's wonderful, and everything is fantastic, and everybody lives happily ever after without ever having any kind of discord, you have to have a villain, right? You have to have a conflict. You have to have something to get people interested in the story, right? So whatever it is that you do, you have to create a villain, right? There was I think it was one of the Mission Impossibles where they were talking about a disease, like the flu or whatever. And they said, in order to create a drug for the flu, in order to create Bellerophon, you have to create the chimera, right? Using the Greek myth. You have the hero, and you have to have the villain that is almost as formidable, right, as the hero. And so most products, when we think about doing these kinds of stories, it's really, really hard to come up with that chimera, right? Or that villain that we're overcoming. And sometimes it can be the FAA, right? Or the voluminous regulations you have to overcome every day. We don't really want to make the FAA the villain, but we can make the bureaucracy the villain. We can make the problem that your customer is having the villain. We can make the status quo the villain. There's a lot of things that we can do with that, but we do have to spend some time building up that chimera, or making that villain more formidable in order to make the story interesting. Because what would it be if you had a Yellowstone or a one of these miniseries on cable TV where there were never any problems. Everybody was just happily running around, eating and drinking and having parties and being merry, right? You got to have bad guys, you got to have problems. You got to have, the soap opera. You got to have the love triangle. You got to have all of these things happening in order to make it more interesting and get people sucked into the story, right?
Well, you would think that wouldn't be the case in your dream, but I've not seen it work where it's not.
Mm-hmm.
So you're right. I have to concur. Like it or not.
Exactly. So, and sometimes it's just a matter of making it unexpected. So like there was an IKEA ad where you kind of fall in love with this lamp, right? It's kind of like the Pixar lamp that has all of these feelings and all of these problems and everything else and stuff. And so we think that the lamp is the hero of the story, right? But then, a man walks into the shot and says, the many of you feel bad for this lamp, but that's because you're crazy. It's just a lamp. It has no feelings. And this other lamp is much better than the old lamp. So in this case, you kind of become the joke. The joke is on you because you fell for this story. So it's kind of a nice rug pull comedy that people use to create a villain or create some tension or create something unexpected. So another one that does villains, Steve Jobs used to say, and I always use the Steve Jobs. I hate using a Steve Jobs example in every single book club conversation, but here we go. So Steve Jobs always said, it's better to be a pirate than to join the Navy, right? And their most successful ad was a 1984 ad during the Super Bowl. And you've probably seen this ad. It's based on George Orwell's novel, where everybody is the same. And then, this woman steps up through this crowd of people who are just mindlessly following this dictator and then smashes this screen with a sledgehammer, right? So, it's basically the bad guy is the status quo, and the bad guy is being the same as everybody else. And the bad guy is Microsoft and IBM, but they don't say that, right? In 1984, that was kind of the paradigm that they were setting up. So it doesn't say just that we are revolutionary. It says that we are going to destroy the status quo. The status quo is not just boring, it is the villain, right? And so, the test groups all said, this is terrible. This is not a great ad. It's going to alienate people. It's going to cause problems. You shouldn't run this ad. But Wozniak and Jobs, being the pirates, ran the ad anyway. And they don't want to join the Navy. They want to be the pirates. And that was their brand at the time. Now their brand's a lot kinder and gentler, right? But at the time, they were revolutionaries. And that was one of the things that really set them apart. And, that ad is used in every single advertising class you have been to since 1984 as an example of, how to break the status quo. So that was a good one.
Yep.
Cool. Any other principles or thoughts that you have about, things you found in the book that you want to talk about?
No, I think that one on vulnerability was the one that just struck me.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're right. I mean, when I think back on it, the times that we have done that, it was good. It sold.
Yeah. Absolutely, because we become real people and not just bureaucrats or not just people in suits, who are trying to sell a product.
I remember we were on a phone once to somebody. This was
Mm-hmm.
before, so a long time ago, and with respect to technology, anyway. And they said that they were asking all these questions. We were saying, we told them why we're doing it. And
Mm-hmm.
finally, the guy said, "So how do I make this happen for me?" I said, "You give me your credit card number." And he said, "Oh, okay, here it is." And then we did it.
Mm-hmm.
But
Oh yeah.
it was just, we were going nowhere fast. And I was at the point where I said, I don't know what to do. I said, these are things we know how to do. There's nothing else we can do. And finally, he made that remark and said, "Oh, okay."
Here's the
So,
next step.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, Mercedes-Benz's ads are always great, and they never show vulnerability, but they do show, they make their customer the hero of the story, the same as what we've been talking about. And it's basically one of the ones that they use is called Snow Day. And it's basically a boy who needs to get to a date, right? Typical setup where he's just like, he's going through all of these problems with weather and everything else, and hearing all of this stuff, and he wants to go on his first date with this girl and everything else, and is afraid he's not going to be able to make it because this and this and this and this and this. So he has no trouble getting there, and then we wonder for a fraction of a moment whether or not his date is going to show up, but then she shows up also in a Mercedes-Benz. So the car got him there on time, the car got her there on time. The kid's the hero of the story, because he does what he wanted to do. He overcomes the obstacles and everything else, but the Mercedes-Benz is his wingman, right? And just the way they tell the story, with the music and the setup and the lighting, and it really tugs on your heartstrings when you tell a really good story in a really good way. So if you can put your product in as the wingman, rather than the hero, and make your customer the hero, I think that's even better than making your customer or making your product the hero, which is what marketing's been doing since the 50s, right?
Right. And that's why we do storyboarding and so forth.
Exactly. So, yeah, and I think there were some really good templates in the book that were kind of fun about, the mechanics of storyboarding, the mechanics of setting up your hero and your villain and your wingman and, all of those things. And so we'll share a few of those in the show notes and things like that. So yeah, I mean, if you want to see really great examples of stories, insurance companies, like Geico and Farmers Insurance and those kinds of things with their mayhem and all that, they always do a really good job of telling engaging, funny, fabulous stories. And the reason is because the only thing that differentiates insurance is your guy, right? So the service that they provide, or the, whatever, so that they want to show themselves as human. They want to show themselves as vulnerable and funny and all of those things. So that's why they use the funny commercials and the very engaging gecko and the mayhem. And the Farmers Insurance. We've seen a few things with the trampoline through the screen door kind of deal,
Yep.
Cool. All right. Anything else you want to add to the conversation? Do you think it was worth a read? A scale of 1 to 10, what do you think?
Probably a 9.
9?
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that's like a refresh, but it's different and more detailed.
Okay.
Handleable.
Yeah. They did go into more I guess how-to, technical detail and diagrams and things like that. So I think that was probably true. I think I'd give it an 8 just because I think there are better books on the subject to start with. This one is good when we get into the mechanics, and we get into the mechanics, but I don't know that our clients really would care that much about the mechanics. They just want it to work.
exactly.
Some of them do their own
That's a
videos,
different
so
perspective, but if you look at it that way, okay.
yeah, and so maybe a 9 for us and 8 for clients. But some of our clients really get into the details. So for them, if you like getting into the mechanics of how to manipulate emotions, then this is a really good book.